Good afternoon, team. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn for today, the How Do You Know Improve Your Employees and Subcontractors Are Competent. We'll start with safety culture. Having been defined as the product of the individual and group values, attitudes, perceptions, competencies and patterns of behaviour that determine the commitment to and the style and proficiency of an organisation's health and safety management. First question would have to be, how do you know that you are competent? Seems a bit of a strange question to ask, but it's difficult to determine how we measure success in our workplace. For any employee, measuring the competence of their employees is an essential element of the working relationship, the safety culture and our appraisals process. Ensuring that personnel understand their levels of competence and will be assessed regularly, that they understand the methods by which you'll conduct these assessments, and to clarify the implications if they fall short of these expectations, are a key part of any effective company management framework. Ensuring competency is correctly identified, addressed and complied with meets not only our organisational requirements for the timely and effective completion of projects, but equally importantly supports a safe working environment and culture for our employees, our subcontractors, clients and all other persons. So determining competence, first thing we have to look at is HSE competence. It's the level of ability of personnel to effectively ensure that health and safety requirements are met through their core jobs, with the ultimate purpose of ensuring incident and fatality-free business operations. HSE competency assurance is a process designed to provide reasonable confidence to management and other stakeholders that employees have the competence to carry out the HSE critical tasks of their job to the standards expected. A highly trained and competent workforce can improve organisational efficiencies while lowering operating costs and workplace incidents. Must remember that the competency being assessed has to be relevant to the task being completed. There's quite a bit of legislation around competency. For Australia nationally, we work under the Work Health and Safety Act of 2011, and that requires the provision of any information, training, instruction or supervision that's necessary to protect persons from risks to their health and safety arising from work carried out as part of the conduct of their business or undertaking. Western Australia and Victoria don't ascribe to the National Safety Act, so come under their own Occupational Health and Safety Acts and Regulations. The WA OSH Regs of 1996 define a competent person as someone who is, in relation to doing of anything, acquired through training, qualification or experience, or a combination of those things, the knowledge and skills required to do that thing competently. In Victoria, the OSH regs require risk controls, particularly lower level controls, dependent on the workers and supervisors having the appropriate competency to do the job safely. Training should be provided to maintain competencies and to ensure new employees are capable of working safely. Acts themselves give a reasonable overview of how to make the workplace safe. They outline your legal responsibilities and duties as an employer and a business owner. Regulations, on the other hand, set out the standards you need to meet for specific hazards and risks, such as exposure to noise, operation of machinery, and manual handling. They also set out the licenses you need for specific activities and the records you need to keep and the reports you need to make. Under New Zealand's legislation, two pieces of legislation that apply: the Health and Safety and Employment for Mining Operations and Quarry Operations, and also the Health and Safety at Work, General Risk and Workplace Management Regulations. Both of those refer to the need to provide appropriate training, instruction, information and supervision for all workers, and making sure that it is suitable and adequate for the task being undertaken. Identifying the information, training and instruction or supervision should cover the different work activities that can require different levels of information, training or instruction, and certain work activities that require high levels of training or supervision for workers and others in the workplace to remain healthy and safe. On top of the legislation and as supporting documentation to that, we have the Australian New Zealand standards, company policies, procedures and guidelines, and client competency requirements and contractual obligations. The legislative frameworks are administered by the regulating agencies who are responsible for inspecting workplaces, providing advice and help, and handing out notices or penalties as appropriate. When the courts are deciding whether workplace health and safety laws have been met, they may consider whether you followed the appropriate codes of practice for your state or territory. You can get approved codes of practice and advice and support from the regulator in your state or territory. Defining competency. Competency itself is measurable behavioural objectives used to define the actions of a worker and what they should be able to perform, the level of skill that the worker must be able to demonstrate when performing that action, and in order for the worker to be considered fully trained. In other words, competencies are the fundamental goals of any training provided and the things your employees need to be able to do. That applies equally to subcontractors. The term competent person is used throughout the legislative framework to define a person who has acquired through training, qualification or experience the knowledge and skills to carry out specific tasks. Competency-based training courses are designed to ensure that learners engage with the material and demonstrate their achievement of those competencies. Common components of competency. We've spoken about knowledge, skills and ability. Knowledge is defined as facts, information and skills acquired through experience or education, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. Skills are defined as the knowledge and ability that enables you to do something well, where ability is defined as an acquired or natural capacity or talent that enables an individual to perform a particular job or task successfully. Competencies are observable, measurable, verifiable, and may include a range of acceptable performance. Again, we're not measuring knowledge, we're measuring the ability of the person to safely and correctly put that training into action. The following information should be considered when defining competencies: any industry or regulatory requirements or standards, company-specific policies and procedures, the job descriptions, roles and responsibilities of the individuals, the knowledge and skill requirements for the role, and that may be the use of equipment, the location it's being applied in, or other site-specific requirements. Criteria related to the job task, including the criticality, complexity, frequency, and importance of the task. Environmental factors also have to be taken in, work environment versus legislation, for example. Competency is not. Training versus competency is a belief that if an individual attends training, he or she is competent. Training is a means of acquiring knowledge or providing knowledge, and knowledge can be tested, but competency must be demonstrated on the job. We often refer to qualifications versus competence. A qualification differs from competence in that a qualification is simply the prerequisite for doing a job task, while competence is how well that task is done. Finally, we look at competency versus performance appraisal. Competency assessments and performance appraisals or evaluations are both methods of assessing an employee's job performance. However, competency evaluates can you do your job, as opposed to performance appraisal, which assesses how well you do your job. We look at competency modelling and how competency helps achieve safety. Competency-based safety training is a form of occupational training that requires learners to demonstrate the ability to perform defined, concrete skills related to essential environment, health and safety performance objectives. Without verification of learner competency, training doesn't meet its basic goal, which is to ensure as fully as possible that learners have absorbed the content and met the terminal learning objectives. Safety and compliance training essentially requires employees to have full awareness of hazards and mastery of their job duties. Competency-based safety training focuses on specific skills learners need to do their job safely and effectively, such as choosing and wearing the proper PPE, performing lockout or tagout consistently and correctly, and recognising all the hazards present at the worksite. Learning comes from a number of ways. People will bring skills to the activity, but we also need to take into account their attitude. Both of these things will actually form behaviours. An appropriate behaviour is a good demonstration of both understanding and the ability to apply competency in the role. That's measured by way of performance. Provided these are positive and competency is demonstrated, then we are working towards our organisational goals. Under our contractual obligations, there are simple and obvious ways to commence the determination of competency of employers and subcontractors. Pre-qualification and training record audits to prove the successful completion of the relevant trade skill or qualification. A review of certificates or qualifications or licences for high-risk activities, provide evidence that the relevant training has been undertaken. Requiring a subcontractor to submit a training matrix for personnel engaged as part of a pre-qualification, and ensuring contractually that the subcontractor is directed to supply competent personnel and or requesting proof of qualification and verification of those personnel's competency. But doesn't automatically follow the qualified person is a competent person. Logicams provides cutting-edge consultation, delivery and maintenance services and solutions to multiple industries. Under our guidelines for industry-specific competencies, simply put, they're the competencies that you require of anyone to perform in their role or the basics without which they could not function effectively. For example, a teacher will require good maths and English skills, a teaching qualification and a sound understanding of the curriculum. A midwife, on the other hand, will require the skills to deliver a baby safely, an understanding of the birthing process, and a qualification in the subject area. These industry-specific competencies are the basics to build upon when measuring the competence of staff. They will change over time as industry best practice and legal requirements adapt. It is therefore important that employers remain aware of the industry-based competency requirements for the staff and that they support employees to continue to invest in their own professional development in order to remain sufficiently competent. As a client, having defined a scope of works, we will be able to identify the types of competency required to deliver that project. Effective contracting will include specifics relative to the competencies required, reviewing records and retaining copies of those competencies held prior to the task commencing, and maintaining records of training provided, performance reviews, safety observations, job safety and environment analyses, and Take Fives, and a review of the finished product or project to demonstrate competency. The tools we can use to identify competency include the definition of the competencies itself, knowing what to look for, a position description, making sure that if we employ an engineer to achieve a goal, that he's not coming into the business on a medical degree, assessment tools themselves, assessments of the way the task is conducted, assessment of the safety, assessment of the way the product is presented. We can review training matrices to show that personnel have received training and demonstrated competency previously, video evidence of the task. We can audit records, ask for subcontractor training records, and obviously evidence of qualification. Competency should be measured throughout the employment relationship, but don't forget to include the very beginning of that journey. The recruitment exercises should be as robust as possible to ensure that new entries into your business have the required skill set to do the job. Recruitment processes that rely solely on interview only show part of the picture, so try to incorporate some form of assessment of skills into your process. Have the candidates worked on a particular element of the role, or ask them to present you an aspect of the job that's important to company goals. Ensure qualifications are checked and these checks are logged, and employers may be required to show evidence that their staff had the required competencies for the role when they started, and if their performance starts to slip in the future. The key here is to ensure that those starting their career in your business are capable from the beginning. Managing employee competence, when it is poor, is a huge drain on time for any manager, and so a starting point of incompetence makes no business sense whatsoever. Conducting ongoing competency-based assessments of existing employees requires an analysis of the employee performance over a specific period of time. This is more likely to be an annual performance review process, with midpoint reviews designed to ensure the employee knows how they're progressing and has sufficient opportunity to improve before their final review. Making sure that the employees have sufficient competence need not be something that takes a huge amount of time. If you invest in measuring and helping your employees to work on their key competency, rewards will be present for both the employee in terms of their own self-worth and your business in terms of outcomes. The ongoing measurement of employee performance is essential in order for them to understand if and how they are falling short of the required competencies. Best practice approach to underperformance: highlight the shortcomings in regular one-on-one discussions, give the employee action points for how they need to improve and realistic timeframes for them, and to ensure that they receive the support they need and that it's provided by the employer. Review the employee's performance since the original discussion over a course of weeks. Agree a final review whereby you'll reassess if the employee has demonstrated the required competencies. At the final review, use evidence from the interim reviews to justify your judgment. If performance is not where it should be, you may need to commence a formal process down a capability route. Competency assessments. The tools we can use to identify appropriate levels of competency include observation, general observations in the workplace, safe act observations, leadership in the field, and so forth. Questioning and interviewing of peers and the worker themselves can provide you with information about how they feel they are going in relation to the job, and can also reinforce for you whether they understand the requirements of the competencies being used. You can ask them to conduct a written assessment, participate in simulations or role plays. We can get third-party testimonials from supervisors or client contacts, examination of the product, project or the output that they've provided, and auditing the records. Ultimately, we've spoken a lot about competency generally in the field, but corporate offices need work health and safety regulations too. We have a lot of people employed in our business that are providing specialist information, and their competencies are paramount, as is their ongoing professional development. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask at this point? Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Thank you for tuning in, and I will look forward to talking to you when I meet you. Thank you.